the one time. It's the family bloodline.
Hey, what's good people? Welcome back to another episode of the Family Bloodline Podcast. We're back. I hope everyone is doing well out there today. I'm going to be picking up where I left off for Project 2025 in a little bit here. Just getting situated and trying to get things a little squared away. Not that I'm unprepared, because I'm not unprepared. I am very prepared. I am actually waiting for my co-host. So as I do that, just wanted to talk to the people, see how everybody was doing. Hopefully everybody's doing fine. Everybody's doing fine. Yeah. Getting logged into a few other places as well before we get after it. So just as a quick overview of what we've read so far, we've talked about the different realignments and restructuring that Project 2025 has suggested and recommended for the different branches of government, as well as the military service. We've gone through and we've looked at how Project 2025 has also wanted to restructure and realign different organizations for education, or take away some areas in education. We've gone through and we've begun to talk about how they would restructure, realign the aspect of student loan repayment, and all that stuff. We talked about that, how they redo voting, how Project 2025 outlines and talks about the transgendered community and where they believe that they should be able to participate or not in the military services, as well as how they react to educational purposes. So, and a bit of a redefinition of somewhat of a redefinition of biological gender, as it were. So we've looked at all of that by and large, and we're going to continue talking about it and going through different sections of Project 2025 shortly. So stay tuned and hang on as I get ready to begin reading again. I'm looking at something right now. It's kind of got me a little thrown off. It's a little bit annoying, but whatever. I'll be able to figure it out shortly. So yeah, that's where we are, and trying to get everybody a little caught up in where we are. And so I will jump back into I'll jump back into Project 2025, and I'll be reading from page 335, starting at the paragraph that starts at getting the federal government. So in a few seconds here, I'll jump back into that and continue the reading. So yeah, that was a quick overview of what's been going on in it. And so yeah, here we go. Let me get the screen back up for everybody, because I don't want anyone to think that I'm going through this document and adding my own spin to it, because I am definitely not doing that. I'm reading Project 2025 verbatim, uh, in its own words, in its own boldness, as it were, in its own context. And I'm not reshaping or reforming any of the information that is being talked about in it. Uh, I'm doing none of those things, none of them. I'm reading it in its verbatim, as it were. And so I'll continue. If you ain't ready, get ready because we are about to go in. Getting the federal government out of the business of dictating school discipline policy is a good start. But if the next conservative Department of Education simply rescinds the bottom error regulation, it could very easily be enforced again on day one through a dear colleague letter by another leftist administration. In addition to rescinding the policy and any related guidance, the next secretary should work with the next attorney general on a regulation that would clarify current regulations to state that Title VI of the Civil Rights Act does not include disparate impact standard. As law professor Gail Harriet has noted, the alleged existence of a disparate impact standard under Title VI makes everything presumed illegal unless given special dispensation by the federal government. Although it would require political capital from the White House, given that mainstream news outlets are sure to frame it as an attack on civil rights, the next conservative administration should take sweeping action to assure that the purpose of the Civil Rights Act is not inverted through a disparate impact standard to provide a pretext for theoretically endless federal meddling. Assistance to states for the education of children with disabilities. Preschool grants for children with disabilities, or equity in IDEA. Effective January 18th, 2017, the department issued final regulations under Part B of IDEA that require states to consider race and ethnicity in the identification, placement, and discipline of students with disabilities. The newest administration should rescind this regulation. Again, these are the recensions that Project 2025 is bolstering. Students should never be denied access to special education services because of their race or ethnicity, but this is happening in school districts across the country thanks to the Obama administration's Equity in IDEA regulation. This was not the intent of the regulation, but it is an inevitable byproduct of its flawed assumptions. The Obama administration looked at the racial statistics on special education assignment and made two assumptions: that African American students were disproportionately overrepresented, and that this overrepresentation constituted a harm that required federal pressure to ameliorate. School districts deemed to overrepresent minority students in special education assignment or in discipline among special education students are tagged by their state education agencies as engaging in significant disproportionality and are required to reallocate 15% of their IDEA Part B money into coordinated early intervening services that are intended to address the root cause of disproportionality. In practice, this can mean raiding special education funding to pay for CRT inspired equity, consultants, and professional development. I don't know how or why they threw that in there. Again, as a reminder, CRT has not been taught at the K through 12 levels. So these two paragraphs that I just read are making an assumption, and they're also making uh, I guess you can call it like an early attack, preemptive attack on CRT as it's being taught at the collegiate level because I guess they think that it's going to press its way down to the K through 12. Continuing. This is especially problematic given that both of the assumptions behind equity and IDEA are flawed. Special education services provide extra assistance to students. They do not harm them. And according to the most rigorous research on the subject conducted by Penn State's Paul Morgan, Black students are actually underrepresented in special education once adequate statistical controls are made. What are those adequate statistical controls, I wonder? That means this regulation effectively further depresses the provisions of valuable services to an already underserved group. The next administration should immediately commence rulemaking to rescind the equity and idea regulation. No placement regulation is required. Right. The Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, OSERS, should prepare a digest of the best research on this subject and share it directly with state superintendents and state special education leaders across the country who have been led by this regulation to believe a false problem diagnosis. Early efforts should be made to dissuade states from continuing to operate on the assumption that overrepresentation requires state intervention after the federal pressure is rescinded. Another preemptive move. Provide school meals to children in need. Do not use federal meals to support radical ideology. That's odd because that's essentially all they've been doing and claiming in this entire document. In May 2022, the U.S. Department of Agriculture (USDA) tried to advance a radical political agenda using the federal school meal program. Nearly a century ago, federal lawmakers adopted the National School Lunch Program (NSLP) and School Breakfast Program (SBP) and other services that provide meals for K through 12 students to give children from low-income families access to food while at school. Since the 1940s, federal lawmakers have greatly expanded these meal programs, creating creating an entitlement for nearly all students, regardless of family income levels, and have turned the meal programs into some of the most wasteful federal programs in Washington. Now, the USDA is threatening to withhold federal taxpayer spending for these meals from schools that do not implement Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 set that so the term sex is replaced with sexual orientation and gender identity. I I don't know how that I don't know how those two things go together. I don't understand how those two paragraphs go together, but I do know that trying to rescind or take food out of school, out of the school system, I don't believe in that. I believe that, especially this day and age, because of the way our society has begun to shape up and be structured, parents are working longer and harder hours and making less. With that being said, the amount of time being spent at home with the actual quote unquote nuclear family has been directly affected by this. And so parents aren't having the time to actually feed their children properly, spend the proper amount of time with them, or simply be involved or engaged with their children. The dominant thing is for parents to be at work and send your kids to school. And so if parents aren't able to actually create this environment for their children, schools have had to pick up slack in the interim. By doing that, one of the things or responsibilities that our society has placed on schools is ensuring that our children at least have proper meals and not take that away, and don't let us dodge left and right by replacing or inserting different ideologies so that now we're not even taking care of our children. Right. If our children are the most important thing in our country, we need to actually exercise that, and we need to actually show them that. Doing the opposite means essentially that we are not willing to take care of our children. Minus that, we're not, or in addition to that, we're not willing to take care of our children in lower income or middle class families. And so the society or the families who are able to have a stay at home person, whether it be a father or a mother, they are posited in a situation in which they can make breakfast or make lunches or even have dinner ready for children when they get back to the home. But again, that's not the vast majority of society, especially in today's economy. And pushing this agenda forward would simply do nothing more or less than harm our children. I think this is an attack on our children, unfortunately. Anyway, continuing the reading. The next administrator, and again, this is Project 2025, a conservative document, just as a reminder. Continuing. The next administration should prohibit the USDA or any other federal agency from withholding services from federal or state agencies, including but not limited to K through 12 schools, that choose not to replace sex with SOGI in that agency's administration of Title IX. The administration will have significant support for this policy change among state officials and members of Congress. 22 state attorneys generally filed a lawsuit after the USDA's announcement that the agency intended to withhold spending from schools that do not replace sex with SOGI. Members of Congress also introduced legislation in 2022 that would prohibit the agency from carrying out its intentions regarding Title IX. Now, hey, Spike, I appreciate it. Thank you. What that essentially means and does is they've taken one thing, one part. So I'm actually reading Project 2025. If you want to go to the YouTube channel, you can see the actual document. I have it up on my stream. I'm reading it verbatim and I'm giving some input and comment on it. And as always, if anyone wants to come up, I'm glad I said that. If anyone wants to come up, I will post the link. I'll have the link in the chat. That way, they can give their opinion or their spiel about what they think Project 2025 is saying and what it means, regardless of what I'm reading verbatim, because we all know that unfortunately people will hear things differently. And so if you want to hop on a YouTube channel and listen and follow along, you can always look at, you can find us at the Family Bloodline Podcast, the Family Bloodline 5823 on YouTube. And so continuing the reading, again, this is some of that earmark stuff that's not cool, right? So they're taking another part of Title IX out of context and meshing it over with feeding children in our schools. And I think that's a very unnecessary approach and unnecessary step to trying to fix an issue. But what it does do, however, is it pushes a conservative agenda a bit further, right? Again, these are not my words. These are not my views. This is Project 2025, as stated before, which is a conservative document. It's their strategy for what should happen when the next conservative president takes office. Phase out existing income-driven repayment plans. That's the next bold topic. While income-driven repayment (IDR) of student loans is a superior approach relative to fixed payment plans, the number of IDR plans has proliferated beyond reason, and recent IDR plans are so generous that they require no or only token repayment from many students. The Secretary should phase out all existing IDR plans by making new loans, including consolidation loans, ineligible, and should implement a new IDR plan. The new plan should have an income exemption equal to the poverty line and require payments of 10% of income above the exemption. If new legislation is possible, there should be no loan forgiveness, but if not, existing law would require forgiving any remaining balance after 25 years. So, very similar to college loans in today's society, which are at a ridiculous rate. And we talked about this on one of the previous readings. Now they're passing that movement on, or they want to pass those generous movements on to middle and low income earning families. When again, although nuclear families as a whole have begun to work more hours and earn less because the pay has not increased. Inflation has gone up, but pay has not increased. And the only way that people who are honorary or may have bonuses, give me 1 second. Or may have bonuses, the only way that they are able to keep up with the inflation rate is to work longer hours, which again, in turn, reduces the amount of time that parents are allowed to be in the house to create an environment that is conducive to the best raising, as you were, of children, right? But that fact is thrown out the window. And instead of understanding people where they are and wanting to help and save America, would rather take the actual program that they're using, right, and make it a loan. We want to make it a loan, not just a loan, but again, like college debt, make it unforgivable to families or to Americans who are already struggling. And this has like a 3 to 4, just off the top of my head, this has like a 3 or 4 tiered result. One of the results that creates is a deeper disparity or increase between the wealth gap, That's one of the things that's going to happen. While you are incurring a 10%, which is what I just read, 10% of the income, right? You're incurring these interest rates over a 25-year span if you make a certain amount of money, which I think last time we checked, the average income was about 46 grand to hit the poverty line. 46 grand and 46,000 as you, right? And below that hits the poverty line, right? So you're going to take these families and extend. If you make $46,100, now you are locked into a loan that's not going to be forgivable just because you wanted to send your child to school and eat. That's what this is going on about. That's one of the effect. Well, that's the second effect. And again, another third effect is how parents will be able to actually interact with their children in the home because of the longer hours and less rage. And then four, the control that the states will have, because again, there's a continuous, insidious movement of giving states all the rights and the powers. When you look at the states and you understand the educational system within a lot of different states, take Mississippi, take Kentucky, take Tennessee, uh, take Texas, take Arizona. Take a lot of the, unfortunately, is the truth is a lot of the red states' education systems, and you look at what this would do to them, and you understand the unfortunate unbalance of the, call it what you want, be it race baiters or the actual racism in America. There are going to be certain populations that are able to have access to funding and monies that others will be actually directly driven away from. And if that's not concerning to you as an American, I hope that you go back and you rethink what it is to be an American. Moving forward, President Biden has proposed a new income driven repayment program that would be extremely generous to borrowers, requiring only nominal payments from most students. It would turn every policy lever to the most generous setting on record. Ergo, lowering the percentage of income owed from 10% to 25% under existing plans to 5%. I like that. Lowering the number of years of payment required from 20 or 25 years to 10 years. I like that too. An increasing income exemption from 150% to 225% of the poverty line. Listen, I don't understand the whole hangup, and this is a little bit off script. I'll tell you what, I'm gonna come back to that. Let me read this first. The median borrower who earns an associate's degree would owe only $15 a month, regardless of how much he or she had borrowed. The median bachelor's degree borrower would owe only $68 a month. This plan essentially converts these students' loans into delayed grant programs, and good. And good. I have been looking for someone to debate this actual topic about, like, literally debate this. If you can't be okay with American citizens getting student loans repaid by the federal government, I prick my thumb at you, right? And the reason why is you have a system of predatory lenders that are targeting a specific age group of people who they know and understand do not have the understanding, the wherewithal to know exactly what these student loans are going to get them into and the length of time it's going to actually take, right? And so that's, I think they're predatory in that sense. That's the first thing. The second thing is the the amount of uh, profit that's been made off of student loans. And take this as a point, and please go look this up. It's not just Republicans who are heavily invested in these loans, the businesses that get the loans back or any of that nature, but it's also Democrats, right? I keep telling this to people, like, there is not one single party that has a monopoly over evil, over racism, or over pandering, regardless of the category of pandering, because they both do it. And what I continue to stand on, and I will not get off my square for this, is we have to stop giving our loyalties over to these parties. We need to make these politicians work for us. But right now, we are working for the politicians. Former President Trump, and current VP Harris, they've not had to do as much work as a lot of people who are in the field actually doing for them. It's happening, right? They're going out and they're getting these big ticket names, but they're not going down the street like politicians used to and knocking on doors and having that discussion, that hard discussion, where they're looking at the person face to face. Something that's not scripted, by mind you. I'm not talking about Joe the plumber shit, but they're looking at the person face to face, just walking around, knocking on random doors, and saying, "How can I help your area, your neighborhood be better? What can I do to get your vote? What do you need to see happen?" Right. First of all, I know they're not going to do that because we're talking about politics at the federal level. It's not the local level. Right. But if we're going to actually hold their feet to the fire, stop giving your loyalties over to these political parties. They have not earned them. And at the rate we're going, they won't have to earn them. We're giving our votes away to somebody because they make us feel good, either to the this is to the actual credit of the DNC, or to Trump's former President Trump's actual quote unquote credit, if you want to call it, right? Because there is a stark contrast between the two actual rallies, as it were. You look at the Republicans and Trump's rallies as they go out, and it's full of hatred. It's mean spirited. There's no policy being spoken about or talked about. There's nothing but insults that are being hurled, and it's confusing at best. Conversely, uh, and I support her wholeheartedly as a service member. I don't have to agree with all of her goings ons, but you look at what just happened at the DNC and the huge pompous fanfare that gets you motivated, that gets you happy, and it inspires hope. But how much policy was talked about? Um, how much of the actual topics that we are dealing with on a daily basis were directly spoken to versus us being caught up in the DJ, killing it with the grooves as he went through and talked to and talked to a different state, right? So there's anyway. Let me get back to this crazy ass uh, document. Other structural reforms that the Department of Education requires. Give me 1 second. I gotta unplug some stuff here. There we go. Reform federal education data collection. The National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, and other data collections currently release data by race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, English language proficiency, disability, and sex. However, one of the most important, if not the most important factor influencing student educational achievement and attainment is family structure. Now, watch how they flip this. I just talked about family structure. As education scholar Ian Rowe has noted, NAEP already collects data on students' family structure. It just does not make those data publicly available. I don't know why or why not. The Department of Education, or whichever agency collects such data long term, should make student data available by family structure to the public. And that's weird. Anyway, including as part of its Data Explorer tool. As discussed above, data collection efforts should be consolidated under the Census Bureau. Data collection efforts in higher education should also be improved by housing higher education data at the Department of Labor. So previously in Project 2025, there's been this huge shift to move different departments under the Department of Labor. One of it being the Civil Rights Office of the Civil Rights, the Education, and there was another one that I can't remember. I just find it odd that they would want to move those directly under the Department of Labor. Call it a conspiracy theory, but it could simply be because they're wanting to make workers instead of actual free thinkers. This would provide more transparency in evaluating post-secondary education and workforce training program outcomes, contextualize those results based on trends observed more generally, enable the adjusting of real wages to account for regional differences in earnings and cost of living, and develop a reliable methodology for risk adjusting institutional, and program outcomes to more accurately reflect the value added of education programs as opposed to their admissions selectivity. But they've already done with affirmative action, so they kind of executed that part. Currently, the Department of Education relies on graduation rates and average earnings as proxies for educational quality. Both of those outcomes, however, are highly dependent upon a student's socioeconomic background, sex, family status, and other factors. Colleges and universities with selective admissions policies post the strongest outcomes, primarily because they admit mostly low risk traditional students. Open enrollment institutions post the weakest outcomes, largely because life is challenging and complicated for low income and non traditional students who may be forced to drop out when a work schedule changes, a child needs more attention, or an unexpected repair of medical bill makes continuing impossible, which means they do actually know what the average person is going through. They just don't care. Such confounding factors make it difficult to isolate the impact of educational quality versus socioeconomic factors on student outcomes. The Department of Health and Human Services face similar challenges in trying to evaluate healthcare outcomes, and since social detriments of health results in worse health outcomes among those who are social economically disadvantaged, have low educational attainment levels, have struggled with addiction, or have poor diet and exercise habits. Without risk adjustments of outcomes, hospitals treating wealthy patients will always appear to be delivering good care, and hospitals treating low-income patients will appear to be delivering poor care. I don't know if I agree with that. Higher education outcomes data show should be similarly risk adjusted to more carefully isolate the impact of educational quality versus socioeconomic status and other factors on college outcomes. So, please read between the lines on this stuff, folks. Please read between the lines. It's a pretty nefarious thing that they've got going on here, and I don't know about it. Reform the negotiated rulemaking process at ED. The U.S. Department of Education is required by statute to engage in negotiated rulemaking prior to promulgating new regulations under Subchapter 1 of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, as well as Subchapters 2, Teacher Quality Enhancements, and 4 of the Higher Education Act of 1964, Student Assistance. The purpose of negotiated rulemaking is to engage a committee of stakeholders early in the drafting of proposed regulations to ensure that the regulation can be implemented as written, to understand any potential unintended consequences, and to seek suggestions from stakeholders on alternative solutions. The goal is for negotiators to reach a consensus, thus smoothing the way to promulgate a new rule. Scroll down on my page. Although it is helpful for the department to receive stakeholder input, the negotiated rulemaking process has become an expensive and time-consuming undertaking. Consensus is only rarely reached, enabling the department to pursue its own path. The department's master calendar, which requires final rules to be published by October 1st, if they are to be implemented by July 1st of the subsequent year, compounds the problem, making it unduly challenging to update regulations as needed to keep pace with changes in education, finance, accounting, pedagogy, and student assessment. In recent decades, negotiated rulemaking has become a veritable three-ring circus, replete with negotiators who use their Twitter accounts and other social media feeds during negotiations to denigrate the process of their peer negotiators in real time. A few members of Congress use the public comment process to deliver political speeches, apparently to raise their own profiles, but without adding new information to the process. Some advocacy groups have latched onto the process for fundraising purposes, sometimes misrepresenting negotiation language to agitate followers and supporters and encourage them to make financial contributions. At times, the department itself has appeared to sabotage consensus, which enables them to write the regulation as they wish and without regard to the concerns raised by negotiators. The Department of Education should work with Congress to amend the HEA to eliminate the negotiated rulemaking requirement. At a minimum, Congress should allow the department to use public hearings rather than negotiated rulemaking sessions. Reform of the Office of Federal Student Aid. This one's going to be interesting, I think. Student aid. This proposal urges the new administration to end the abuse of FSA's loan forgiveness programs to manage the federal student loan portfolio in a professional way and to work with Congress for a long term overhaul of the program for the benefit of student taxpayers. Oh, give me 1 second. Let's see what happened here. Oh, take that guy out. There we go. Sorry about that, good people. Had a slight delay, real quick. This isn't reading. Do you understand what's going on here? I know do that, but I got my magic keyboard for a reason. For a reason. Okay, well, I'll do it the way it's telling me to. Trying to square my iPad away here. For some reason, it's not charging on my magic keyboard, which is odd. Never had that problem before. Anyway, very good. Something that I can fix, I'm sure. Ah, the new administration must end the prior administration's abuse of the agency's payment pause and HEA loan forgiveness programs, including borrower defense to repayment, closed school discharge, and public service loan forgiveness. The new administration should also take immediate steps to commence the rulemaking process to rescind or substantially modify the prior administration's HEA regulations. The federal government does not have the proper incentives to make sound lending decisions, so the new administration should consider returning to a system in which private lenders, backed by government guarantees, would compete to offer student loans, including subsidized and unsubsidized loans. This would allow for market prices and signals to influence educational borrowing, introducing consumer driven accountability to higher education. Pell Grants should retain their current voucher like structure. Again, I don't know why they are doing this, but they're seriously attacking this uh, the repayment of student loans. Like it's a real thing. It's a real one. I don't understand it. If Congress is unwilling to reform federal student aid, then the next administration should consider the following reforms: switch to fair value accounting from FCRA accounting. Give you a quick hi there, Mr. Burt. And consolidate all federal loan programs into one new program that utilizes income driven repayment, includes no interest rate subsidies or loan forgiveness. Wow. Includes annual and aggregate limits on borrowing and requires skin in the game from colleges to help hold them accountable for loan repayment. Man, these jokes, when I tell you somebody want their money, baby. They are not playing in these loan streets, boy. They need it. They need it. Anyway, the Biden administration has mercilessly pillaged the student loan portfolio for crass political purposes without regard to the needs of current taxpayers or future students. This must never happen again. As detailed in Section 3, the next administration should work with Congress to spin off federal student aid into a new government corporation with professional governance and management, new policy priorities for 2025 and beyond. New legislation should be prioritized for nearly 250 years. Congress has incorporated public and private institutions, including banks, the District of Columbia's city government, and other organizations that federal officials deem to be conducting operations in the public interest. Such charters offer a certain status to organizations, often viewed as a seal of approval, according to one Congressional Research Service report, which can help these organizations in their fundraising and other advocacy efforts. With the nation's largest teacher association, the National Education Association, cites its federal charter. It lends the NEA a level of significance and suggests an effectiveness that is not supported by evidence. In fact, the NEA and the nation's other large teacher union, the American Federation of Teachers, I scroll down, they use legislation and other efforts to block school choice and advocate for additional taxpayer spending in education. They also lobbied to keep schools closed during the pandemic. All of these positions run contrary to robust research evidence showing positive outcomes for students from education choice policies. There is a non-conclusive evidence there is non-conclusive evidence that more taxpayer spending on schools improves student outcomes. And evidence finds that keeping schools closed to in-person learning resulted in negative emotional and academic outcomes for students. I don't think that's totally true. Furthermore, the union promotes radical racial and gender ideologies in schools that parents oppose, according to nationally representative surveys. I don't know why I couldn't say that. The union promotes radical racial and gender ideologies. Hmm. Congress should rescind the National Education Association congressional charter and remove the false impression that federal taxpayers support the political activities of this special interest group. They are seriously keyed up on like there's a couple few things that are weird, uh like they're going in on, and a lot of it has to do with um LGBTQI. They are like literally trying to cut them off at every single corner that they can. It's an odd interaction. They are really concerned about these folks for some reason, and I don't think they need to be outside of pushing their personal religious views, because that's a part of it. That's a thing, unfortunately. One second. Talking to my cohort real quick. All right, we'll get back to it. We'll get back to it. Here we go. This move would not be unprecedented, as Congress has rescinded the federal charters of other organizations over the past century. The NEA is a demonstrably radical special interest group that overwhelmingly supports left of center policies and policymakers. Members should conduct hearings to determine how much federal taxpayer money the NEA has used for radical causes favoring a single political party. Oh, now they're trying to read out political parties through education and vice versa. Weed out education through political parties. Parental rights in education and safeguarding students. Federal officials should protect educators and students in jurisdictions under federal control from racial discrimination by reinforcing the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and prohibiting compelling speech. So now we're about to go through and hit up the First Amendment. Interesting again. But I'll continue. Specifically, no teacher or student in Washington, D.C., public schools, Bureau of Indian Education schools, or Department of Defense schools, which, by the way, as a reminder, this is what they've begun to try to reallocate all of the education system to and through, as I've previously read, should be compelled to believe, profess, or adhere to any idea, but especially ideas that violate state and federal civil rights laws. But they are okay with hanging the Ten Commandments up in school. That's weird to me. That's very weird to me. By its very design, and we're about to go into critical race theory again. Okay. By its very design, critical race theory has an applied dimension, as its founders state in their essays that define the theory. Those who subscribe to the theory believe that racism, in this case, treating individuals differently based on race, is appropriate, necessary, even making the theory more than merely an analytical tool to describe race in public and private life. The theory disrupts America's founding ideals of freedom and opportunity. So, When critical race theory is used as part of school activities such as mandatory affinity groups, teachers' training programs in which educators are required to confess their privilege, or school assignments in which students must defend the false idea that America is systemically racist, the theory is actively disrupting the values that hold communities together, such as equality under the law and colorblindness. There is no such thing in America as colorblindness. There is no such thing in America as colorblindness. It's an easy thing to say, but there is no such thing in America as colorblindness. And I think that's a good thing. I think when we see each other and we recognize each other's ethnicity or gender or race, there's a part of their culture that we can there are parts of their culture that we can actually understand and see. And to call yourself colorblind, this means that you're not ready or prepared to deal with some of their culture. As such, lawmakers should design legislation that prevents the theory from spreading discrimination. For K through 12 systems under their jurisdiction, federal lawmakers should adopt proposals that say no individual should receive punishment or benefits based on the color of their skin. That might get them in some trouble. Furthermore, school officials should not require students or teachers to believe that individuals are guilty or responsible for the actions of others based on race and ethnicity. Again, they're stepping on their own feet. They're talking about themselves. Educators should not be forced to discuss contemporary political issues, but neither should they refrain from discussing certain subjects in an attempt to protect students from ideas with which they disagree. Now, let's take Florida. All right, I'm going to pause in place because one of the reasons why people have shied away from critical race theory, as it has been expressed, is because it made their kids feel bad. It made their kids feel bad. Such hypocritical jargon, just such hypocritical rhetoric. Proposals such as this should result in robust classroom discussions, not censorship. At the state level, states should require schools to post classroom materials online to provide maximum transparency to parents. I don't disagree with that too much. I really, really don't. I think that would be a pretty good idea. Mm. Again, specifically for K through 12 systems under federal authority, Congress and the next administration should support existing state and federal civil rights laws and add to such laws a prohibition on compelled speech. I got to stop this, but I'll continue reading. Advancing legal protections for parental rights in education. While the U.S. Supreme Court and other federal courts have consistently recognized that parents have the right and duty to direct the care and upbringing of their children, they have not always treated parental rights as co equal to other fundamental rights, like free speech or free exercise of religion. As a result, some courts treat parental rights as a second tier right and do not properly safeguard these rights against government infringement. Yeah, like child support. The courts vary greatly over which species of constitutional review, rational basis, intermediate scrutiny, and strict scrutiny to apply to parental rights cases. This uncertainty has emboldened federal agencies to promote rules and policies that infringe parental rights. For example, under the Biden administration's proposed Title IX regulations, schools could be required to assist a child with a social or medical gender transition without parental consent or to withhold information from the parents about a child's social transition, ergo, changing their names or pronouns. The federal government could demand that schools include curriculum or lessons regarding critical race or gender theory in a way that violates parental rights, especially if it requires minors to disclose information about their religious beliefs or beliefs about race or gender in violation of the Protection of Pupils' Rights Amendment. To remedy the lack of clear and robust protection for parental rights, the next administration should work to pass a federal parents bill Bill of Rights that restores parental rights to a top tier right. Such legislation would give families a fair hearing in court when the federal government enforces any policy against parents in a way that undermines their right and responsibility to raise, educate, and care for their children. The law would require the government to satisfy strict scrutiny, the highest standard of judicial review, when the government infringes parental rights. Further, ensure that any regulations that could impact parental rights contain similar protections and require federal agencies to demonstrate that their action meets strict scrutiny before a final rule of promulgated, or before a final rule is promulgated. At the same time, Congress should also consider equipping parents with a private right of action. Two federal laws provide certain privacy protections for students attending educational institutions or programs funded by the department. The Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA, protects the privacy of student education records and allows parents and students over the age of 18 to inspect and review the student's education records maintained by the school and to request corrections to those records. FERPA also authorizes a number of exemptions to this record's privacy protection that allows schools to disclose the student's education records without the consent or knowledge of the parent or student. The Protection of Pupils' Rights Amendment, PPRA, requires schools to obtain parental consent before asking questions, including surveys about political affiliations or beliefs, mental or psychological issues, sexual behaviors or attitudes, critical appraisals of family members, illegal or self incriminating behavior, religious practices or beliefs, privileged relationships, as with doctors and clergy, and family income, unless for program eligibility. The difficulty for parents is that FERPA and PPRA do not authorize a private right of action. If a school refuses to comply with either statute, the only remedy is for the parent or student, if over the age of 18, to file an administrative complaint with the U.S. Department of Education, which must then work with the school to obtain compliance before taking any action to suspend or terminate federal financial assistance. Oops, I've overread. I only meant to read to page 340. I'm on page 345. So I'll finish this and then I'll pick it back up later, team. Investigations can take months, if not years. The department has never suspended or terminated the funding for educational institutions or agency for violating FERPA or PPRA. In essence, Congress has granted parents and students important statutory rights without an effective remedy to assert those rights. I didn't know that I was reading. I didn't feel like I was reading fast, but I've almost read. I read just about 10 pages of this nonsense. I don't even want to call it nonsense, right? I've read almost 10 pages of this document, and I will pick this back up again next week. This stuff is an eyesore. It's an absolute eyesore. And if this type of if this type of strategy is pushed forward into an American standard, we are going to be in trouble, family. We're going to be in pretty big trouble because this is not a good look for the thing that the unions created, which is the middle class or even the lower class. This hinders and hurts us greatly. And it drives our society down and it drives our society backwards. So I it's hard to read somewhat because it's acknowledging and exposing a side of America that I hoped we had moved past. And clearly we have not. And for us, it's it's just not a good look, family. And so I hope we can do better. I hope we can begin to pick better leaders because this is essentially my hat was getting annoying. But this is essentially what our leadership is. Some of our leadership is trying to shape America out to be, and it's really not a good look. It's not a fair level playing system for Americans at large. And it's this document, the way it's beginning to read, is being set up to benefit a certain group of people and benefit them only, while subjecting the rest of us into I don't want to call it peasantry, but I will call it serfdom, right? Because we will be. This is a movement to put us back into into a formal training period of simply being a worker or being a serf and accepting everything that the ruling class wants. And it will be able to continue to divide America. This does not make for a stronger America. This does not make for a better economic economically stable America by any stretch. And so just being a bit discouraged by reading this, and the reason why I'm discouraged from reading this is because is the simple fact that we have people in elevated positions that seriously think this and consider this on a continuous basis. It's not considering Americans. It's not considering all people and citizens in America to be Americans. It's not considering the rights granted by the Constitution whatsoever. It's looking to rescind and restrict those rights directly. The danger in this document, the dangers embedded inside of this document, hopefully these ideas fall by the wayside and they never see the light of day. Hopefully this strategy never gets uh, room to breathe and grow and then give rebirth. Again, I've listened to Alexander Stevens' cornerstone speech, the things that were trying to be enacted and continued in 1861 that are giving rise and thought and levy to these types of documents and this type of thinking. Americans, just do me a solid and let's start at the foundational thing of trying to simply be a good human. Let's try to simply be good humans. Once you've learned how to simply be a good human, you can move forward. But if you can't simply learn how to be a good human, you're going to be stuck writing this type of information. The issue is that there are people who are sitting in elevated places that have co-authored this document. Staggering. Oh well. Listen, I appreciate everyone for hanging out with me and uh being in on the reading, listening to the reading. You could have been anywhere else in the world, but you decided to listen to me read a very boring document. And I'm trying to do my best to get through it and make it bearable. But some of the things that are in this document are a struggle. And to know that there are people who haven't even heard of this document is even more alarming. It's even more alarming. We've got to make sure that people, again, are simply learning how to be good humans. So, with that being said, hey, thank y'all for coming out. God bless and good night.
Time for the one.